I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all for joining. My name is Saja Hindi. I'm with the Denver Post. I cover mostly state politics and am interested in stories about how certain policies affect women and underserved communities. Women in the workforce have faced difficulties for a long time, but this pandemic has exacerbated some of those issues. And so we'll talk a little bit more this morning about what that looks like. I connected with all three of these very knowledgeable women when reporting a story a couple months ago about the rate of women, particularly moms, who were not only leaving the workforce, but staying out of it. And as with many aspects of the pandemic, they found that this problem disproportionately affected women of color, a lot of whom worked in specific industries. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, this is not just a problem in Colorado, but is a national issue. And so for that story, we heard from women who worked in different jobs in different areas of the state, talk about why this has been so difficult for them. And one thing I found when talking to these women was, and that we can probably delve into a little bit more, is many of them were concerned about sharing their stories publicly because of the stigma and the worry that it would make it harder for them to get new jobs. So just to put in a little plug, I plan to continue reporting on this issue and would love to hear from any of you who may have experienced this, and we'll be sure to share my contact information. So let's find out about the state of women in the workforce in Colorado and some of the proposed solutions to addressing what's keeping them out. I have a mix of questions from the group as well as some attendees, and we'll open it up for more questions at about 10:45. But before we get into all that, let me introduce you to some of Colorado's leaders in this work. We have Kristin Blessman, President and CEO of the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce. Kristin's role is to execute the organization's mission of advancing women in business. She was hired in 2017 to bring value to membership through innovation, brand awareness, and long-term vision. Through the creation of a new leadership program, mentoring program, and unique peer group programming, Blessman has overhauled curriculum and programming at the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce and brought a new value proposition to the members and to the community. We also have Nicole Riehl, who is the president and CEO of Executives Partnering to Invest in Children, or EPIC. Nicole joined the organization in September 2019. Her experience spans across the private and nonprofit sectors, with her career beginning as an early childhood teacher at an on-site corporate childcare program. After working in the financial sector on behalf of a large national home builder for several years, she returned to early childhood and supported the quality ratings and onboarding of more than 200 childcare programs participating in the Denver preschool program after it was authorized by voters in 2006. Most recently, Nicole held the position of Chief Operating Officer at Denver's Early Childhood Council, where she helped build a team of 30 staff and an operating budget of $5.5 million over the course of 8 years. And of course, we have Kristen Strohm, President and CEO of the Common Sense Institute. She's a leading voice for free enterprise and economic opportunity in Colorado, with a career spanning small business, public policy, and philanthropy. CSI is a nonpartisan research organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of Colorado's economy. CSI is at the forefront of important discussions concerning the future of free enterprise in Colorado and aims to have an impact on the issues that matter most to Coloradans. Kristen has been honored by the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce as one of the top 25 most powerful women in Colorado. So without further ado, Kristen is going to start us off with a brief presentation on the latest data and trends and help frame the issue as we talk about it today.
Thanks, Saja. And to kick it off, we felt that it was really important for the attendees today to just get a little bit of the data and frame the panel discussion, which I know will be really exciting and to hear then from all of you. If you do have questions throughout the program, feel free to log those in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be sure to get to those throughout the program. But I want to kick it off with just a quick video that we're releasing with Common Sense Institute on what the state of the She-Cession is in Colorado. Megan, will you turn up the volume? Well, there is sound with that video, so I would encourage you to go to our website and check it out. It really frames the topic really well, and I'll dive into some of those stats that we just showed here as well. So next slide, Megan. So
I can read.
Oh, it's okay. So, it was some good music to dovetail into the presentation. So I think that it's important to start off with just some context. You know, what do women mean to our workforce? What does our workforce look like today prior to the pandemic hitting? In 1958, less than 1/3 of the workforce was women. It took about 30 years to reach 45%. And nationally, the labor force participation rate during the pandemic for women is as low as it has been since the 1980s. So we're talking generations of progress are really at stake for the working woman. Our ongoing research at CSI, which we started monitoring jobs data immediately when the pandemic onset, really paints a grim picture for the working woman. When we break down the data, we found that women across the board are really being impacted disproportionately. And that's why economists in Colorado and across the nation have dubbed this the She-Cession. Next slide. At CSI, we have a really great team of economists and researchers, and I want to just give kudos to one of our team members, Abigail Janot, who's been doing a lot of research and really driving this. So Abigail, great job on bringing this to the forefront of policy discussions. An interesting stat, I think we all remember the Great Recession too well. It's really interesting that when you look at it, women only accounted for 30% of the job loss during the Great Recession. Flash forward to this recession, and women have accounted for 55% of the job loss. So in half the time of the duration of the Great Recession, the amount of women impacted has really doubled since the last recession. Next slide. Just a quick update on where we are in Colorado. Employment figures have been in the news a lot, and in Colorado, our employment is down 5.2% from pre-pandemic levels. When we say pre-pandemic, we're really talking about January. Colorado actually did add some jobs from February to March. Unfortunately, we didn't add as much jobs as we did in February. So we're starting to see it slow down a little bit. I do want to caution that as a research institute, as economists, we don't love to look at month over month data because it can sometimes be a little bit volatile. We like to look at bigger pictures. The good news is we are starting to regain some jobs. The bad news is that it isn't at the rate that we would hope to then return back to pre-pandemic levels. So you can see from this stat, Colorado actually ranked 28th in terms of March job levels. There's only 2 states in the entire nation, Idaho and Utah, that are above pre-pandemic job levels and have started to really see themselves come out of the recession. Next slide. So if we dive into the data even a little bit further, the unemployment rate we're seeing remain pretty flat at 6.4% in Colorado. As I alluded to, what we're really doing is we're looking at, okay, where were we pre-pandemic as it relates to jobs? How many women were employed? What was our labor force participation rate? And we found that in Colorado, our labor force participation rate for women has dropped significantly from 63 to 59%, which is a huge drop. And nationally, we aren't seeing that big of a drop, which I'll dive into in a moment. What that really means is that if we had maintained the job and labor force participation rate January 2020 up until this point, there would be over 100,000 more women in Colorado's workforce today. Colorado, as I alluded to, is kind of an anomaly. We're behind the nation, we're lagging, women are being impacted more. And so our female participation rate remains lower than pre-pandemic levels, actually 4% lower, whereas the national average is only 1%. Next slide. So here's just another way of looking at it too. The blue line on the screen is the male labor force participation rate. What you can see is they've really rebounded. They've fully recovered. The red line is females. You can see that female labor force participation rate in Colorado has not recovered and that the gap has actually widened. And the difference, so starting point, it was a 9% difference from male to female. Now we're at 13.5 as it relates to the difference between male and female participation. Next slide. One question that we've been really asked is how can you slice this data even further? When you look at women as a whole, that's great, but as Saja alluded to, have different subgroups been impacted, minorities, have mothers been impacted? What are the ages that have been impacted? What about industries? And what we found is looking at this slide is that yes, Colorado moms have really been impacted and hit the hardest. The yellow line up top is labor force participation rate for dads, for fathers. The green line below is the labor force participation rate for men without kids. The red line you can see almost started at the same point as the blue line. The red is moms, blue is just women without kids. Women without kids has really rebounded, but moms is still down 5.1%. And we're seeing that moms has not recovered. CSI actually put out a survey on Twitter asking Coloradans if they were impacted, if they were mom, what was the reason? And it was really interesting to see those results. A majority of women said that it was because of schools being closed or financial reasons why they left the workforce. 54.5% said because of school closures, which I'm sure we'll dive into in a panel discussion. Next slide. So we break this down even further. And if you go to the next slide, Megan. And Megan is driving this, and I really appreciate, oh, go back one, Megan. There we go. Oh. So if we break it down even further, what we're seeing is that young moms, go one more slide, are being hit the hardest. So we have the mom group, we have then young mothers. The age range that we are doing that defines young moms is from 25 to 39. And they, again, are being hit even harder than moms overall. So we're seeing that moms that probably have kids school age, might have had childcare issues, school closures to deal with, again, have left the workforce and haven't returned. Next slide. One thing that we did note too early on in the pandemic is that women of color were really impacted immediately. Some of this data has been hard to get. We get a lot of our data from the BLS, and they don't quite segment it as a state level related to ethnicity. And so it's been a little bit hit or miss, but this is kind of a rolling average, and you can see the volatility. The blue line is minority women, the red line is white women, and the black line is all women. But you can see it's been really volatile. And early on in the pandemic, what was noticed and what was reported is that minority women were really hit the hardest. Good news is what we've seen is that has recovered. However, again, the month over month data can be volatile. So we're continuing to monitor this important point. Next slide. So what do we know? We know that when women leave the workforce, that there are long-term repercussions. We know that when women are sidelined, they lose out on upward mobility, we miss out on raises, they miss out on promotions, and that they're less likely to return to work. A recent McKinsey study found that women's gains since the 1980s, which was that low point in labor force participation where we're at again, it was $2 trillion larger than it would have been if levels remained from the 1970s. So when we're talking about our economy, real GDP, what it means for Colorado to recover, we have to find a way to get women back to work. Women are a crucial part of our economy, and it's important that we find that a way. Another economist said that childcare really is an economic issue and crisis that will be felt for over a decade. If women are sidelined, if we do lose out on women returning to work and we don't come up with solutions and bold policy solutions around things like schools and childcare, it will impact our economy long term. And with that, I would like to just say that, this is really a siren call. it's a call to action. It's an unquiet, crisis that's looming right now. And it really takes people coming together, partners like EPIC, Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce, you all that have attended this webinar today, to come to the table to talk about bold solutions and how we can make sure that women have the ability to rejoin the workforce should they choose. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Saja. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Can you tell us a little bit about why Colorado is lagging behind some of the national trends in recovery?
Sure. It's a really good question, and it's something that I think has really stumped policymakers in Colorado for quite some time. So nationally, 4.6 million women have left. And of that 4.6 million, 2 million are actually still not even unemployed. They're not even looking for work. So when you look then at Colorado, our percentages on labor force participation are way lower. And it's something that I think all the panelists can speak to. It's probably a combination of the industries that are in Colorado. So we have a really high tourism, retail space and industry. And those industries were hit really, really, really hard this year. So I think that could be partial. I know that childcare issues, which Nicole's an expert on and she'll speak to, Colorado has the 8th most expensive childcare in the nation. And then we also had school closures, whereas other states perhaps were able to get kids back into school a lot sooner. I know a lot of families that just had kids returning to school April 1st or after the Easter weekend for the first time in over a year. And you talk about that instability that impacts moms and families. A mom, we know it usually falls on a mom to probably stay home with young kids if they're having to learn virtually. And there is kind of questions out there, I think, for moms in returning to work. They're kind of waiting to see what's the policy going to be. How I can get through this summer, but will schools reopen in the fall before they are eagerly looking to return to work?
Thank you. Nicole, can you tell us a little bit about some of the drivers behind women leaving the workforce and maybe some of the barriers to reentry?
Yeah, definitely. So, we know from a 2020 study that McKinsey did that mothers are 1.5 times more likely than fathers in the household to be spending an extra 3 or more hours a day on things like childcare or housework or virtual learning, which is really equivalent to 20 hours a week or an additional half-time job. So, having to adapt to things like remote or hybrid learning for children, schools closing, childcare facilities closing, or maybe having to pull back their hours and then not being able to afford the financial cost of keeping their child in childcare, for example, has really impacted, we know, a lot of mothers. And I want to be clear too, that there are a lot of parents, men and women, who choose to stay home and work inside their home and raise their children. That's not without hard work and sacrifice either. But we also know that we have a lot of single parent households. We have many households in Colorado that are considered housing cost burdened, which just means, the cost of housing is far above what it really should be. And so in many cases, families really do need to have all available caregivers in the household working in order to, pay for all of those expenses and the cost of living. So we want to make sure that parents, but most especially moms, when they do make that choice to participate in the paid workforce outside the home, that they can find access to quality, affordable childcare and the resources that they need to really make that happen. And in a U.S. Chamber of Commerce study that was also done in the fall of 2020, about half of the employees who were surveyed who said they had left the workforce and hadn't yet returned did cite childcare as one of the barriers that was really preventing them from going back into the workforce.
Kristen, maybe this is something that you can talk to, but what have you heard from some of your members? I mean, is it kind of the same issues, or are you hearing different things?
Well, certainly, we get a lot of our data from Common Sense and EPIC. So thankful to have these partnerships. I think, where I can come in is, with the relationships of, members and sort of what we're hearing. On the small business side, what we heard a lot, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, is, a lot of women-owned small businesses, less than 1% get over $1 million in revenue in Colorado, right? So when you're looking at that, these are like micro businesses in the grand scheme of business. And they didn't have access to the PPP funding the way other organizations did, right? Because you had to have a relationship with a large bank. And oftentimes our businesses weren't banking with them. And so they were kind of scrambling to figure out the PPP process. When that money first came out, it was going through the larger banks. A lot of our members, we gave them access to our banks, even if they didn't bank with them. So that did help. But, when you're not bringing in any money at all, it becomes really, really difficult to run your business. So I would say that that's something new that we learned sort of on the small business side. In addition to childcare, what we heard from a lot of our members is that there's 3 things that really hold us back from growth in the workplace, right? It's number 1 is corporate culture and unconscious bias. Number 2 is communication. And number 3 is lack of mentorship and sponsorship, right? So even pre-pandemic, those are things that are holding women back from growth and success in the workplace. And what I really always focus on is number 2, which is how it boils down is communication, like how we communicate to ourselves, how we advocate on behalf of ourselves, right? So when you put that in terms of the She-Cession, and we're already battling with whether or not we can grow and whether or not we can be in the workplace to begin with, because we have things like imposter syndrome, and there's no way that I can do this the way that the model's being shown to me. Throw the pandemic on top of that, and we're just saying to ourselves, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. There's no way that I can continue to do this and succeed in the workplace. And so it's a mindset thing too. And it's the cultures that we're being put into where we're just finally saying to ourselves, there's no way to succeed in this environment. Put the pandemic on top of that and all the pressure of the kids being home. You just can't do it. We're tapping out.
So kind of bouncing off that question, Nicole, can you tell us a little bit about some of maybe the proposed solutions or some things that employers can do to essentially address some of these barriers?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think every company is going to vary in their ability to support caregiving solutions. And there are simpler, lower cost solutions in addition to much more significant investments that companies can make here. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that was certainly true before the pandemic. It's even more true now. Companies should start looking into their company policies and practices to ensure they're truly designed to support flexibility for employees who have caregiving needs and that they need to attend to, and that the challenges of working families and parents are normalized and widely accepted in that company culture. Those policies need to be applied consistently, and managers need to be trained to make sure they know how to respond to those things and apply those policies consistently, because not all managers and supervisors may naturally agree with those types of strategies or apply them in that way themselves, right? So I think, speaking to Kristen's point, communications are really, really important, because so many employees, without having an explicit communication sent to them saying, this is our corporate philosophy on supporting working families, here's how we do that and how we respond to that, and here are the expectations you should have as an employee when it comes to receiving flexibility from your immediate supervisor, or when it comes to your annual reviews and wage increases, right? A lot of employees feel like, maybe the company says that they try to do that, but it's a much different situation with their immediate supervisor, and are very concerned about asking for flexibility when they need it, because they feel like that will impact perhaps their annual review or wage increases and things like that. We also have companies making much more substantial investments in childcare now, because they really do see the need here. Including things like providing childcare stipends to employees, or even going to the limit of providing on-site childcare. Backup care is great, but we have a very serious supply shortage of childcare here in Colorado, and we really need employers to step up and help us help us think about that solution. Guild Education founder and CEO Rachel Carlson is a good example. She was just lauded by Forbes in an article for their investment here in Denver for an on-site childcare facility for their employees. And I think a lot of companies, as they are starting to think about how people do come back to work and what schedules look like and how they really structure everything moving forward after the pandemic, childcare supports and even on-site childcare, I think could very likely become a competitive advantage when it comes to companies looking for talent.
Kristen, do you have anything to add to that? I know last time we talked about this issue, you said that it's kind of a balance where you don't want to put undue burden on business, but you want to make sure that people have what they need to be successful.
Do you mean Kristen Blessman or Kristen Strohm?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen Blessman.
I feel like grade school, it's Kristen S versus Kristen B. I do, it's interesting when you look at the makeup of businesses in Colorado, big corporate, as we like to call it, like publicly traded, there's fewer of those than there are, like 95% of what we would consider small business, kind of not on the micro end that we were talking about, but traditional small business. So their perception might be, well, I can't do, like what a DaVita or BF is doing as far as flexibility with childcare, on-site childcare. And I think where it's important to participate is with organizations like Epic that can show you that, as a small business, you can have some of those policies, you can afford them, and you can just learn from one another. So it doesn't need to be dictated to you, but it is possible to do those things. And there's ways to come together as small businesses, or there's organizations out there like Dispatch Mom, where you can access care in a very easy way, right? And I think that that's the most important thing. And to be able to have flexibility in order to do those things is really, really important. And so certainly the large corporations are doing that. They're providing stipends and on-site care and access to care. I think what we have to really be concerned about in Colorado is how do we get the small businesses to think about how to do that? And that's why I think, Epic and other organizations like it, and Common Sense Policy Institute and the Women's Chamber can bring people together to solve these problems, because I think that what we need to focus on now is the how. We know what the problem is. How are we going to solve it? Because whatever we had before isn't working.
This one is for Kristen Strohm. So we actually had a good question from an attendee that I think we could answer before we move too far. How is the labor force defined? Does the labor force include MLMs or under the table babysitting/nannying, or people starting new ventures or businesses?
Yeah, I think, there's two things that we talk a lot about. The unemployment rate, which is what you hear on TV a lot. You hear a lot about the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is defined by people that are actively looking for work. And the other one that I actually think is more important to focus on is the labor force participation rate. And that really is how many people are no longer actively looking for work. They've essentially stopped looking, they're sidelined. And if we see major declines in the labor force participation, that means that people have kind of given up or they've left the workforce completely for reasons. And that's the key part that we've really examined and noticed a trend, especially in Colorado, that we're lagging way behind national averages. As it relates to the definition, it's jobs. We take BLS data is what we use. Unfortunately, it lags a little bit. So we won't have April data until 2 weeks from now. So there is a lag in the data too, which is again, why we like to look at it more holistically, longer term than just month over month data. But what we've seen over the entire 2020 is that that trend is real and that women are lagging way behind in Colorado, especially.
Nicole, you talked a little bit about what employers can do. Are there other proposed solutions related to childcare? And kind of along those lines, one of the attendees asked, what makes Colorado childcare relatively more expensive than the national average?
Yeah, great question. Well, first off, thankfully, our schools have started to reopen and have provided relief to a lot of parents. And so we need to make sure those schools stay open. We also know that childcare has been a big issue in our state for a long time. You know, half of the families and children in our state live in what we call a childcare desert, which basically just means for every 3 children who need childcare, you only have 1 available licensed slot available in that community. You know, we had hundreds of family childcare homes close over the past decade, and we lost 11,000 infant and toddler slots because of that, despite the fact that our population was growing here in Colorado, right? And of course, the cost was mentioned earlier. You know, this pandemic really stress tested the childcare industry, and quite frankly, it crumbled, right? It showed us that, you know, we've lost about 10% of programs so far in Colorado, and the margins, which were already razor thin for that industry, and we're struggling to stay open in many cases, they could no longer do that. You know, we saw that over time, the cost of operating these programs has continued to really strain that business model. For example, the cost of real estate. You know, providing childcare is an expensive venture. Not only do you need a lot of trained and qualified staff, but children need a lot of space and square footage. And we all know what the real estate market has done here in Colorado, that, you know, it's gotten very expensive for housing on the residential side. It's also gotten tremendously expensive for childcare businesses on the commercial side. And so we feel like there are a lot of opportunities to think about how we lower some of those real estate and operating costs for childcare businesses, incentivize developers and employers to really think about this as a solution, and address some of the, like, for example, we knew that we had really significant regulatory issues that were preventing individuals who wanted to provide childcare in their own homes from doing so. And that is a critical childcare segment, especially for industries like hospitality or tourism, or service-related industries where we know families rely on evening or weekend care. And so, in fact, you know, we've worked on a bill this session at the legislature, which is actually being heard, has its last hearing actually right now as we speak, that will address some of those zoning, building, and fire code issues that we have for family childcare homes. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. And so, you know, we are looking at things like, how do we provide those incentives for employers that really want to look at including this in their benefits package? There is another bill going through the legislature right now, which would create a grant program for employers that want to look at implementing those solutions. And of course, you know, we know that this is a solution that's going to really kind of take a wide range of public and private investments and smart spending on investments in this area. So, you know, there's some work underway now in Colorado as well to really think about how we improve the family's experience and make sure that families' choice is really honored when it comes to childcare solutions that work for their family. And part of that is a new bill that was introduced yesterday to really look at streamlining and consolidating some of these kind of regulatory processes around childcare. So lots of, I think, great work underway in Colorado. And I think Colorado in many ways is kind of thinking ahead on these issues. But we absolutely need, you know, both the public and the private sector to be partners in this work.
Kristen, Strohm, do you know if there are specific racial or ethnic groups that are most impacted by the She-Cession, and we can kind of go into some proposed solutions after that?
Sure. It's a great question. It's something that we've been asked almost every interview or panel, or when we put out a report. How can we drill down and see, you know, which subgroups this is really impacting? Nationally, we know that that is the case, that women of color are being way more impacted than white women. Unfortunately, Colorado data, we just don't have survey samples enough to really drill down too far into if it's impacting Black women, Hispanic women, Asian women more so than others. I wish that we did, and it's something that everybody should let the BLS know, that we do need to have that data to know, so that we can come up with policy solutions to help those communities. I will say that we do know some about the industry breakdown and which industries and if it's women or men that are being impacted. I alluded to Colorado has a really big tourism and retail industry. And, you know, that could be part and part why women are being disproportionately impacted, specifically in Colorado. We do know that 89% of the retail jobs lost were women. and while women only make up actually half of that industry, but disproportionately 89% lost their jobs. So there are some trends that we do know that women of color in different industries are being impacted. I wish that I had the specific numbers. As if we ever do get that, we will be sure to let the public know. But unfortunately, the BLS data just doesn't have a large enough survey size to really drill down on those specifics.
The more data, the better, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Kristen Blessman, how do you think that diversity, specifically with women in the workplace, will be impacted as more people or more women are leaving?
Well, our big fear is that when women are leaving, then they'll be replaced by men, right? And, you know, I wanted to ask Kristen this before the call. I didn't have time, but I was thinking about, there's been so many, you know, economic forecast breakfasts, and there was just an article out, I think it was in the Denver Post, that talked about, you know, economic recovery. And I keep asking myself, I'm not sure how that fully happens when you look at Kristen S's data at the beginning. With that many women out of the workforce, the economy can't come back, because what nobody's really talking about is that you've lost that income into the economy, right? So if you have a 2-parent family and both individuals are working, right? And then one of those individuals isn't working anymore, women have 80% of the purchasing power. They're not out there purchasing. We can't get economic recovery, right? There's just no way. I don't see that happening. So until we solve this problem, we're not going to bring our economy back to what it once was, right? And I think another thing that, you know, we sometimes forget is, without women in the workforce and without women in those high level roles, companies just aren't going to be as successful. You know, we all have heard the story of how J. Crew didn't have any women on their board, yet women were their target market. And then you put women on the board and they do financially perform better. Without, you know, that diversity in thought, you're not going to be as successful. There's study after study that shows that. So we all have a vested interest, right, in getting women back into the workforce, because the economy is not going to come back and companies aren't going to perform as well. So, you know, I think it's important to note that, because, you know, while we as women in business are, you know, think it's super important, everybody has a vested interest in that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that too, real quickly, if I might. We have seen upticks in job growth in Colorado. It's great news, but it is not at the level where we should be. If we just maintained this level of job growth, we will not recover until 2024, which is what nobody wants to hear that. And I think that is largely due because women have been sidelined. And I think on top of that, women are not returning to the work because there is still this uncertainty looming. We don't know what's going to happen this summer. We don't know what will happen with schools this fall. I'm a mom of 4. You know, that there's uncertainty in my household around that. And I think that a lot of women are struggling with that as they look to return to the workforce, especially in Colorado. The month over month data, as I said, it's good. We're seeing an increase, but it's not what other states around us are experiencing by any means.
Yeah. So we talked about what happens when you don't have women in the workforce. Nicole, can you talk a little bit about some of the economic benefits if, you know, some of these solutions are implemented and more women can enter?
I mean, there have been organizations that have really, I think, dug into this around, you know, who is making the decision perhaps to not go into the workforce when they want to because of childcare access or availability, or certainly or cost is a big factor. Again, recognizing that some parents are making that choice to stay home with their children and they want to do so. So we want to make sure we're honoring that as well. But a recent survey released by the National Women's Law Center stated that expanding access to affordable, high quality childcare for the families who really need it would increase the number of prime age women with young children working full-time, full year by about 17%, and by about 31% for women without a college degree. So, you know, that's one organization putting those numbers out, certainly, but I think it speaks to the fact that there are certainly many women who are making the choice to stay home when perhaps they feel like they need to or would prefer to be in the workforce. We also know that working women and parents in the workforce are a very productive segment of the workforce. You know, we're masters at multitasking, right? As I'm sure many of the moms can attest to as well. But they also have a great deal of institutional and skill knowledge that has been developed over the years and that they can offer to companies and really bring that value add to the workforce with their talent as well. So, you know, I think, again, women are very key to our economy, and we want to make sure that, you know, if they want to make that choice to enter the workforce and you know, support their family and support their career and pursue those things, that they can do so and don't have those barriers in the way.
So I have one or two more questions and then we'll get to attendee questions. But Kristen B, can you talk a little bit about the leaky pipeline? You hear, you know, we hear the phrase, but what does it mean and what does it mean for women in the workforce?
So the leaky pipeline is something that was present well before you know, COVID, and McKinsey actually termed it. And basically what it means is that prior to COVID, companies were doing really well, kind of getting women into not highest level roles, but like, you know, senior level management roles. But what has been happening is they stop there. And so it's called the leaky pipeline because women get to a certain level of like senior management and then they drop out of the workforce because the perception is that the cultures won't allow them to do all the other things that are critical in their worlds, right? So if you've got as Nicole said, if you have a 20-hour a week part-time job at home, you're not going to be able to put in the time that you need to at home and also do all the things that's necessary in those highest level senior level roles like VP, C-suite, publicly traded board, those sorts of things. So even before COVID, that was a problem. It's a bigger problem now because we have so many women. And when you look at Kristen S.'s data on, you know, the young mothers being affected, well, there's our pipeline of, you know, future leaders. So, and it's even more affected now because of COVID. So if we don't have women growing in the workplace and getting into those highest level roles, our cultures aren't going to change, right? Because we need women at the top in order for the cultures to change. And in order for, you know, the unconscious bias, the corporate culture, the communication and the lack of mentorship and sponsorship at the top by women, we need those things in order for women to be successful in the workforce.
Sounds good. Is there anything any of you want to add before we jump into audience questions? Okay.
I was going to add, you know, really quickly too, with some of the questions we've had around, you know, employers and what they can do there. You know, I think I've spoken to a number of friends and mothers who are considering, you know, jobs. And one thing I hear a lot is that companies don't always do a great job of publicly putting out information on their corporate culture and their policies around supporting working parents or caregivers and really being kind of what we deem to be family friendly. So, you know, I would encourage companies to make sure that they are putting that information in job postings and being really proactive and forthcoming with that information, because it will attract talent that may not go to other organizations then because they don't really know what their policies are and whether it's going to be feasible for them to do that. I'll also note that the US Chamber of Commerce study that was done in the fall of 2020, 78% of companies said that they understood their employees' childcare challenges and needs, but less than 10% of the companies actually ever did any sort of formal feedback mechanism or survey around that. And so companies are oftentimes relying on their supervisors and middle management to filter that information up to human resources or leadership. And I don't think this is a shock to anyone, but employees aren't always 100% forthcoming with their real childcare challenges and the challenges they're having with their immediate supervisors, again, because I think a lot of those concerns that come up. So again, encouraging companies, if you really want to know about this and think about solutions, I would say find a more formal way to also dive into that data.
That's good. And then Kristen B, the question here is, what effects on the bottom line have you seen from newer policies such as flexible work schedules, continued work at home, etc.? I believe these are positive in the balance as they impact retention, diversity, and well-being of staff, but would suspect any corporation would want to see pilot data on the bottom line to finances on these changes to long-held beliefs about ways of working.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we have the data to show, what the impact of women leaving the workforce has on the bottom line right now, but we definitely have that from before. And there's been several studies that show that, when you have women, specifically women in leadership, because again, prior to COVID, we didn't really have a problem with women in the workforce. We were over half of many workforces. When you have women in senior leadership and women on your board, you perform better financially as an organization. So, women-owned businesses don't grow as well, but corporations grow when they have women at the top. So I just, when you think about that and you think about the amount of women that are leaving the workforce, it's sort of a no-brainer to me that companies do everything they can to get women back. I don't know that we have all the solutions yet on how we're going to do that. I think that we're very fortunate that we have organizations like EPIC that are working on the childcare problem, but that's only one of the issues, right? If our mindset tells us that we can't continue to operate at the level that we're operating at, we see women's mental health suffering as a result of COVID because we can't do it all, right? And if our perception is that we're not going to be able to be successful in a workplace that requires us to put 150% there and 150% at home and put ourselves last, we're not going to keep going on this treadmill and make it. So there has to be some real change, from the corporate culture perspective on how we're going to create workplaces that are conducive to women. And you'll do better financially, right? So it's a no-brainer. We're not asking you to spend money or do things differently. We just need to think about how to make workplaces more friendly for women to be in leadership roles.
Nicole, this question is for you. How do we address the added complexity of the childcare workforce when most of our childcare workers are women who they themselves also had to consider whether they could return to work or not? Do we have enough people interested in working in the childcare workforce to be able to support the larger childcare needs of Colorado families now and in the immediate future?
Yeah, so the short answer to that question is no, we don't have sufficient workforce in the childcare field and industry right now. And so there are a lot of efforts underway to really work on addressing that. Efforts around things like compensation strategies. It is a very, it's a low wage industry right now, difficult to retain individuals in this industry as well. So there are a lot of efforts to look at how we can increase compensation, how we can work on retention and things like building their professional development, learning and skill sets, and providing some scholarships and kind of workforce pipeline supports around that too. So that is a major, I think, prohibitor in terms of the growth of the childcare industry and availability as well. But luckily, we also have organizations in Colorado working very hard on that. Organizations like Early Milestones Colorado doing things like innovation grants and really trying to kind of incubate some what I think are really unique and innovative ideas there. So there's work being done, but there's a lot to do because it is a major issue right now.
Kristen, this next question is for you, and it asks about CSI asking women with school-age children who have left the workforce why they did so and what they want. It seems like with homeschooling rates doubling in 1 year's time nationally, that some women are just prioritizing parts of their life, and maybe some of them prefer that. Isn't a feminist viewpoint that women should be able to do what they want rather than what business leaders want?
I think it's a great question and a good point. I wish that we had a survey sample and detail that would break that down exactly, what if they're staying at home and homeschooling now or what they're doing. It is true that homeschooling has increased, and I think that's part of the answer. I don't think that that's the majority of respondents, especially when we have a lot of single mothers and single households. They don't have the ability to not earn an income. And as I've talked to moms and as a mom myself and juggling, virtual learning and all of these different things that moms have had to juggle in the pandemic, the bottom line is I want the choice. I want to be able to choose if I do want to work. And unfortunately, what this pandemic has done is eliminated that choice completely for far too many women. It has sidelined women because they don't have the choice. They have to stay at home with their kids. And so unfortunately, I think while it's part of the answer, maybe that more women are homeschooling or more families are homeschooling, that's really a luxury probably only afforded to mother, father, or dual parent households. And there's a lot in this data that I wish that we had the specifics around single moms, but I can tell you that single moms have simply been not afforded the opportunity or the choice.
And we have another question. Do you think the changing patterns of business and required efficiencies have altered the business model to the detriment of women and slowed the pace of recovery as described by Kristen S? And anybody who is willing can answer that one.
Kristen B, do you want to take it?
Yeah. I think that that's it's a hard question to answer. I can tell you in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, right? I think that, especially the Women's Chamber corporate partners have been trying really, really hard to create cultures that create a friendly environment for women to succeed. And we're still learning what it takes to do that. I think one of the blessings of COVID, if there is a silver lining, is that companies are being forced to take a look at flexibility and, creating childcare options for women. I think my fear is that what's going to happen now is that corporate culture is going to look at women and think that they expect that. And that unconscious bias might come back to say, do I want to offer this job to a woman because she's going to expect flexible work options and to be able to leave when she needs childcare? And, we all have to recognize that unconscious bias still really does exist. Our members say that it's still the number one thing that holds women back from succeeding in the workforce. I think, again, yes, COVID cultures is going to make it worse for women unless we come up with some of these solutions, because we need to see women succeed in the workforce and have the history of that in order for companies to come along to say, oh, it actually does work. We are doing well with this flexibility. And I get it. We all run businesses here. It's scary. You don't know how it's going to impact your business because we've never done it before. So yes, there are things that are happening that are to the detriment of women. I can tell you that a lot of our large organizations are trying really, really hard to figure out the how. But I will tell you, we don't know how, and again, I continue to applaud the two organizations that are here because they're putting out, ideas for policies and childcare for organizations to choose from. But that still leaves the other two left over that, we talk about unconscious bias in corporate culture, the lack of mentorship and sponsorship at the top, they still need to be addressed. And we still need to figure out the how to change those environments and make it more welcoming so that women can succeed. And that's the work that we're focused on the Women's Chamber, right? So our programming comes into play with our leadership programs, our mentorship programs. We're trying to put together a program for getting women back to work after the She-Cession. So that's our strength. We bring companies together to learn from one another, but companies need to continue to do that. They need to share with one another so that we can see what works.
Thank you. And Nicole, this last question is for you. With COVID, we've seen women step out of the workforce in higher percentages than men due to high levels of stress and needing to bear the lion's share of the burden for childcare and elder care. What are the highest impact actions or policies we in operations can institute to support working women who are also caring for children and elderly parents at home and lessen the stress of working women so that they find a career that works for their work-life balance?
Yeah, I think going back to a lot of the things we talked about earlier is really just taking the time to ask for feedback from employees and really take their ideas into consideration. I think anyone who would spend a day on one of the moms groups on Facebook or social media is going to hear a variety of struggles and challenges with moms trying to balance their work obligations and maybe not having the flexibility they need. But trust me, they will give you ideas if you ask for them. And so take that opportunity to ask for that feedback and conduct, anonymous surveys and really, look for solutions and new ways of thinking about how maybe jobs can be shared, or, shifts can be split, or, there's lots of different ways to do it, I think, right? We all kind of get stuck in our own paradigms and our own natural way of thinking. This pandemic, I think, has done a good job of really disrupting and shifting a lot of those paradigms. And so let's take the advantage and the opportunity to do that and really think about how we can communicate differently as businesses or employers out there, and how we can solicit those ideas and feedback from employees as well.
Sounds good. Well, thank you to the three of you for sharing all of your knowledge and the data and information about this. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who attended. Before we wrap up, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen S.
Thanks so much, Saja, and really appreciate all your continued coverage over this important topic and bringing it to light. We did get the sound to work on the video, so I'm going to play it once more to conclude for today. I know that Nicole and Kristen will log their organization's information in the chat. Feel free to reach out and connect. We'd love to continue to work on this important topic with all of you that attended today. So thank you so much.
Women juggled a lot last year. The She-Cession looms. Most jobs lost during the pandemic were held by women. Over 100,000 Colorado women left behind. For our economy to recover, women must get back to work.
Thank you again, and look forward to seeing you all soon.